Hello everyone, this is part 1 of What If Naruto Met Past Hinata. This story is by mangospoons, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. Live every day as if it were your last. The words were simple and clear. That day they were spoken by a friendly sensei, they had resonated deep into Hinata's mind. To live each day as if it were your last. As a shinobi, no other phrase could mean more in one's personal agendas. Today could easily be your last tomorrow. You had to make it count for something. But oftentimes, Hinata didn't act on the thoughts that raced around her like shuriken, beating, striking, and slicing at her until she broke down in a messy conglomeration of ninja and hopeless little lost girl. At months away from 17, this really hadn't changed much. This theory still stood steadfast, detectable by the current state of affairs that had ensued in only moments. The mission had been easy enough so far. Take the scroll, carry the scroll, and deliver the scroll. The two bands of rogues only hours apart had not been part of the plan. No step had ever included their appearance. But then again, that was surprise. Hinata was not doing so well. No, actually, she was doing horrible. Curse Byakugan and its uncanny abilities to drain one of chakra in what seemed like only a few minutes. Time weighed like hours in the fight going on. She blocked the mental fatigue of being worried and focused on her enemy, racking up numbers. 4, 8, 32. They continued till the fall, his heavy body disintegrating onto the turf of the roadside. She was only vaguely aware of his presence beside her, slash, kick, and tumble, up again. It was all limbs and blood and swears. She danced in and out of her opponent's grasp, eyelashes fluttering, clothes flags in the wind, ethereal, beautiful, and silent. She had no time for words, they distracted, they were a burden. Naruto was already occupied, she could go without her typical sounds of concentration, the ringing of numbers off of trees. He passed the petrel of her vision before leaping away, unseen. She had only hesitated a moment to watch his fleeting form, aware he was not abandoning her, and leapt forward again, hands distended. They were heavily outnumbered. 10-2 was not a walk in the park, even for someone as seasoned as them, especially when only 6 were s. Her eyes wavered and she stumbled on her footing, a low pant echoing off of her lips. No time. Keep moving, moving. Seeing, lurch, strike, see. She pressed forward on her toes, balls of her feet springing up and landing the palm of her hand deep in his chest. Blood littered his lips and she relaxed, like an exhale of air. The sword drove through her arm without even warning. How could she have been so stupid? Hadn't she seen him coming behind her? Sweat mixed with blood on her brow and she gasped, Byakugan wavering, holding, flickers of white-hot pain across the spectrum of violet, blurring everything out. 3 days of non-stop travel and Naruto as a partner. Chakra deprivation and too many to keep up with. A knife in her arm, cutting and tearing and. The mistake was a natural response, though she should have been better disciplined to have let it come to this. She should never, ever have let it get in the way. Hinata stumbled, and she screamed. After that, Hinata was vaguely aware of the tearing of the underbrush as he rocketed out, blood ran between her fingers as she touched her arm. It was cut deep to the bone, maybe even past, her head bobbed forward and she opened her mouth in an attempt to find reason, but everything was going too fast. Flicker. Byakugan, chakra, holding on. She would not let her knees hit the ground, but they did anyway. She raised her head, eyes still fighting to focus, the kunai still clutched in her palm. When had that gotten there? Reflex. Yellow streaked in and out of the frame, her mind not having enough time to catch up. She was still panting, there was blood all over her sleeve, all over her hand, her chest, the grass. She watched in stupor as the two danced, rough, vicious, feral. Nothing at all like the refined softness of her heritage, yet so beautiful she was enthralled. Even when the katana plunged through his chest, still wet with her own life, she was mystified by the carnal grace. Her head shocked with pain, Byakugan kicking in again, tearing through everything. It all threaded together instantly. 360 degrees of 2 seconds ago. Then it burnt out and everything was blurs again. Hinata realized that Naruto was no longer up, the shinobi clinging to a tree, hanging on by a thread of wool, hand clutching his stomach. Entrails spilled out, slashed raggedly. Hinata's brain buzzed and hummed as she stood shakily, fighting her way across the clearing, watching the shinobi out of the corner of her eye. Her mind was in too much chaos to form coherent words. All that came out were strangled questions. En Naruto. En Naru. Her knee gave out again and she yelped, grasping her arm before the boy. She reached out her hand to touch his chest, searching. Where was his heart? She couldn't find it. No thrum, no steady pulse she'd heard a million times this mission, no flutter when he got excited, no drum when he was still. Red seeped out of his wounds, congealing around the handle of the sword, burning. His skin was pale, but his body felt like fire. Where was his heart? Naruto. Her shout was choked as she threw her hands on him, still searching. The red burnt her hands. What? Questions burned her mind, searing. She should never have screamed, never. Then, maybe he wouldn't be. Tears clouded everything and sped onto his lifeless body, those blue eyes frozen open and skyward. No. No, no, no. She stared at him and her heart thrummed, blood rushing from her arm. She didn't know what to do, so she did the only thing she could. Byakugan. Piercing, blinding pain. Her head screamed, or maybe it was her mouth. She couldn't tell. All she knew was that the pain had been instant, her eyes no longer seeing the moment they had engaged. She didn't have the strength to ask why as she collapsed forward over him, the red still spilling from him like blood. Her eyes fluttered, numb, and then, Hinata fell, his name still tickling her lips. She didn't know how long she floated, lights popping like camera flashes past her. She was in deep water, but she wasn't wet, surrounded by bubbles that floated from her nose and tea, thick and rippling like honey. She watched them with shaded eyes, her mind still as death. Death, was she? Yes. Another bubble and she turned her head lazily to the side. She was tired, but she was still alive. A lock of indigo hair swayed on the waves, light penetrating her world from the surface. Her hand was ghostly pale as she reached out to touch the sphere, it dancing precariously close to her outstretched fingers. Light danced in her eyes, still flashing and flickering like static, reflected off of the incandescent surface of her former breath. She watched, mesmerized, clothes still flowing with invisible currents, held up and suspended within nothing. She watched, and then suddenly, the bubble popped and with its dissipation went the light. And with the darkness came the thrust. She was still, and then rocketed upwards, spinning and whirling in unidentifiable hues and great glowing swirls of something. Violet, blue, red, and lavender chased each other through the fray as her eyes widened, still trying to take in the sights of her inner conscious, or at least what she thought was her inner conscious. The black around her began to melt away, creating a million pinpoints eaten up by the colors that were invading, still thrusting her forward into what she didn't know. And as soon as it had begun, it stopped her, and she was once again floating. Suddenly, water filled her lungs and she coughed and sputtered and gasped, choking and treading in the water she'd landed in, kicking to the surface. She fought for the air she could see, the sunlight creeping through the depths. Her hand reached up, and her head followed, breaking the surface of her dreams. Ah! Hinata catapulted her head up, her chest heaving, eyes wide and lips dry. She blinked her eyes and trembled, unable to feel the dampness of her skin, only dry. Her eyes squeezed shut and then opened again as she stared at her perfectly normal hand from its position among the tangle of what appeared to be bed sheets. She lifted it, still in awe that it was intact and not covered in blood from her arm. She immediately looked to the injury, but found nothing but the charcoal gray sleeve of a cotton shirt, and when she pushed it back there was nothing there, not even a scar. Her mind fought against the confusion. What? Her words were mumbled in disbelief as she looked at the bed below her. Bed. When had she? She took up a bit of the sheet, rubbing it through her fingers before lifting her head to stare at the room she was in. White walls and soft titanwoods accented little pops of color here and there. A doorway to the right of the bed led to what appeared to be a tiled bathroom, simple and clean. It was a beautiful room, but unfamiliar. It was too simple to be her room at home, or any of the traditional homes she'd ever been in Konoha. It was too big to be Shino's or Kiba's houses either, too big and too clean. She whipped her head to the other side, seeing the broad window with fluttering curtains, cracked in the early dusk of the morning, letting in the smell of grass and wet earth. What? She exclaimed this time, untangling herself from the covers, only to get more entwined. She thrashed in some kind of mad hysteria and confusion and suddenly found herself on the floor, knocking her head painfully on what appeared to be a bedside table. Something fell off with the force of the impact, crashing towards the floor, and she heard the sound of shattering glass above her mad attempts to get the sheet off of her legs. She panted, her face flushed, and finally kicked free, knocking back into the table as she went backwards, it rattling loudly. As she hissed in pain, she rubbed the back of her head and looked at whatever had fallen, a picture frame, face down, glass sticking out from the thin trim of metal surrounding it. She stared at it for a very long time, too afraid to turn it over. Instead, she stared at the foreign wood floor and saw a scratch on her leg from where it had caught the edge of the low bed frame when she'd fallen in desperate means to escape. She'd never ever been in this room before, and it frightened her senseless. All at once, the scene at the clearing came flooding back, and with it miles of confusion. Where was her injury? Where were the trees and twilight and smell of blood and death? Her head pounded sharply and she hissed again, rubbing the growing bump. She flexed her fingers, still consumed by the fact that she was able to move at all, and then focused her attentions on the bed beside her. Wherever she was safe at least, but that still didn't really help her situation, and that meant she needed to get out as soon as possible. Get out, and, all too quickly, the sight of the boy with his eyes glazed and skyward in the dusty evening filled her memories, making her tremble with anxiety. If she was here, where was Naruto? Was he all right? Was he alive? She shook her head, and almost instantly tears began lacing her eyes. No, he wouldn't be alive. He'd been espered straight through the chest, his heart having stopped long before she reached his body. And it had all been her fault. She sank back against the nightstand, the bone-freezing sorrow and guilt taking over like a blanket of snow. It's all my fault. It's all my fault, she whimpered, quiet sobs escaping her body. She couldn't shake the sight of the S-boy from her heart or her mind, the image plastered to her like wet paper. She took another rattling cry and buried her face in the sheet beside her, inhaling its unfamiliar scent with each gasping breath. Here she was, alone in a place she'd never been, probably far from home or captured, and the one boy she'd ever loved with every molecule of her heart was S. Because of her. She was so consumed with herself that Hinata didn't hear the low muffled sigh and groan issued from the bed. The bed that still held an occupant. She didn't see the shaggy head raise and blink in the sun before looking over to where she had been to find that the sheets were gone, and so was she. The person rubbed their eyes and yawned before sitting up and crawling across the bed, peering over the side in a daze, stifling another great intake of air with a tightened hand. Hina, what are you doing on the floor? Hinata cried again, her own sobs drowning out the sound of the deep, rough and tumble voice. The figure's head tilted in confusion, slowly waking up and coming to find the girl in question crying on the floor. With a low em of the mattress, it lifted itself off of the bed and slid to the floor beside her, still watching in confusion. Hina-chan, what on earth are you going on about? Hinata's cries ceased as soon as the two hands came to either of her shoulders, rubbing gently through the fabric of her shirt, bringing her back to reality. She stared at her legs in silence as the rubbing continued. Was it her, or was the motion almost soothing? Her head jerked up and her hair went flying. Wait, what? She looked to her left shoulder, seeing the heavy lock stick to her cheek and fall down her back. Her hair was long, she said, still looking at the mane that was at least 5 inches longer than it had been when she'd been fighting in the clearing. Now it was well past her shoulders, collecting in blunt strands by her chest. Long. What do you mean? Her face whipped around again, this time staring in the face the last person in the world she'd ever expected to see. What? He looked at her with confusion, a somewhat unsure grin pulling at his lips. She was speechless. His hair was messily collected on his head, and it too was so much longer than ever, past his ears in golden spikes that made him look like the twin of the fourth. Titan hands were still massaging her shoulder, although one of them had come to wipe the stray tears off of her face with a look of unhappiness. He was beautiful. Hina, why were you crying? Are you sad about the picture or something? We can always get a new frame. His blue eyes flicked to the photo before picking it up gently and placing it on the side table, arm stretching, his head coming very close to hers. Hinata went red, and her brain spun out of control. That's the last time we have that much sake before bed. he said, smirking at her and raising his eyebrow. Hinata's mouth opened and closed, gaping like a fish's. How could it be? She stared at him in utter shock. Not only was he alive, but he was. She tried to put her finger on it. He was different somehow. His chest was broader, his face a bit thinner, his body more filled out. Oh my god. It was Naruto. A Naruto who was supposed to be S. A Naruto who was pretty much kissing her. A Naruto who was at least 3 years older than she was. A Naruto who was going on about sake before bed. Click, click, click. Her thoughts popped into place. Holy S. She'd been in the same bed as Naruto. Somewhere in Hinata's brain a fuse caught flame and burned, and shortly following several things seemed to explode, everything frying like a malfunctioned circuit. Hinata couldn't help it. She screamed. Naruto could already tell that today was going to be strange. Yep. From this point on things were only going to get weirder, no doubt about that. If the fact that his ankles were being tied to his own bed was any indication, Naruto was pretty sure that Hinata had long since surpassed the average fit woman sometimes through. His bright eyes watched her with depths of confusion as she tightened the uncomfortably complicated knot on his foot, binding him permanently to the bed and thus, helpless under her newly hardened eyes. As she finished the act with finesse she rarely used except when feeling especially empowered, she stepped back and surveyed her work. With eyes blazing a hell's fury and hair as flyaway and crazy as if she'd stepped off the battlefield, Hinata appeared like some kind of relentless Amazon warrior and not the demure beauty she usually was. No, this Hinata was very, very different than usual, and Naruto was slowly drawing the conclusion that something was very off about the situation. Not counting the fact that he was being tied up, but also the events leading up to it. He could admit he wasn't exactly savvy when it came to women, but when it came to Hinata he seemed to know what made her tick, a feat deemed a miracle by many, but still valued highly. He knew things about her that no one else would even dream up, so when he'd seen her crying on the floor in a tangle of sheets he thought it only one of her recurring nightmares come to knocking her literally off the bed. He'd figured comforting her would be smart. Oh, how wrong he was. Turns out instead of melting into him in that feminine way that made his testosterone peak and his male protective switch slam on, she opted for a much different approach. Screaming so loudly it made him tumble backwards, to then cause him to catch foot on discarded sheets and then catch a swift kick to his gut to be exact. Yeah, way off. Hinata had then leapt from the floor and tackled him, and then somehow he'd ended up here on the bed, with his hands quickly falling asleep behind his back and his circulation being cut off at the ankle. Now Naruto wasn't stupid. He didn't just lie there, no, he protested quite violently, asking multiple times what seemed to be the matter with his Hinata, but all his rapid-fire questions landed on deaf ears. Now, Hinata was just staring at him with a psychotic look in her eyes, and before he could even blink a kunai appeared in her hand as if by magic. Where the hell have you been keeping that? He shouted, craning his N off the bed. Hinata may have been bordering insanity, but that didn't subtract from the fact that she'd pulled a weapon from a hidden spot on her body, and with nothing but one of his old cotton shirts and those lacy boy shorts she wore for special occasions, it left a lot to the imagination on just where that spot had been. Hinata only hardened her eyes again and stepped aggressively towards her captive, twirling the knife through her fingers in a deceptively calm manner. Who are you? Her voice was calm, quiet. But it held none of the adorable lilt or musical laughter Naruto had long ago fell so soundly for, but instead it took on a cloak of interrogation. Just what on earth was she planning on doing? What was this, an interview with an enemy nin? Hinata, what are you talking about? I'm Naruto, he cried, but it was quickly followed by a sharp scream as she smoothly sped his shirt into 2 neat sections down his chest. She flipped the knife calmly and Naruto gaped at his destroyed garment. My shirt. Answer truthfully or I'll break the skin next time, she said matter-of-factly. Naruto's face paled and he felt his mouth go dry. Hinata, what's wrong? Are you okay? Answer my question. He winced at her tone, demanding and aggressive, and he could feel the steel on his pulse as she held the knife to his N. He swallowed thickly. I don't know who told you this was foreplay, but Hinata, you're seriously freaking me out. Hinata pressed the kunai harder, silencing the imposter's babble. She was feeling hopelessly lost, but she couldn't let him see that. She had to get answers before killing him, and that meant pushing aside all the nervousness and confusion and letting the curse shine through. She tried not to make eye contact though. It was tearing her apart to see those blue eyes shining back at her with so much emotion. Whoever this was, they had done a great job at Naruto, but the fact made her angrier than anything else. How dare they mock him in this way? Mock her. He was the only person she'd ever allowed herself to be selfish about, and now he was and someone was here pretending to be him. Preying on her like a stupid girl. Hinata knew she was always foolish, and she was always a coward, but she was no idiot. No, never an idiot. So, she ignored his protests and pressed forward, even though her hand was shaking horribly. No, stop, wait, the little girl voice in her head was making her look at him as he continued to mumble explanations. Wait a sec. Hinata, it's me. It's Naruto. If this is about your birthday or something. She paused and drew back, unsure. Birthday, she said softly, eyes probing. Naruto gulped and turned his eyes to the ceiling. Well, you know. I forgot. But Hinata, I've been so busy and, well, not to insult, but 22 isn't exactly the important birthday. Or anything. She held her hands out in confusion. Wait, what are you talking about? He looked at her and his eyes were questioning as that deep and bubbly voice surfaced with a tiny amount of relief. For a second she could almost smile at him, the look on his face, the pure hope that maybe he'd get off the hook and she'd forgotten, whatever it was that he was going on about, was so incredibly Naruto that she could almost laugh. The tilt of his mouth, the little gleam of mischief in his eyes, the dandelion crop of hair. Naruto watched in silence as Hinata's expression flickered from angry to dreamlike in a matter of seconds, a light little blush dusting her cheeks. Finally, something recognizable. He licked his lips and leaned his head off the mattress in hopes that he might awaken still Hinata from her stupor of crazy. Hinata, don't tell me you've forgotten your birthday. You just turned 22 last week. Shino threw you that party, and I forgot to get you something. Hinata didn't hear the last part. She was far too concerned with the second sentence that tumbled from his mouth, hitting her head like a record player needle. You just turned 22 last week. What? No, that's not right. I'm only 17. It was Naruto's turn to be genuinely upset as she cut him off mid-apology with the ridiculous statement. What do you mean you're only 17? She just stared at him. That's it. I'm going see crazy. I must be underage genjutsu or something. She cried, the kunai dropping lifelessly to the floor as she stared at him in disbelief. Naruto just stared back, his eyes wide. Genjutsu. What? No. Hinata, we're at home in the bedroom. What? He shook his head from side to side. I must still be dreaming. We're at home. In the bedroom. She lunged forward towards him, her hands grasping the fragments of his shirt, fisting in it and pulling him upwards, their noses inches apart. Somewhere, a part of Hinata's heart was pounding out of control, but even that seemed overrode by the mass amounts of crazy that had since taken over. What are you saying? I'm 22. I'm only 17, I passed out last night in a clearing and Naruto was not alive. But I'm right here. And last night you were here and we went through like 2 bottles of sake. Which I might add is the last time because you've gone absolutely psycho. I'm not even legal. At this exact moment, Hinata went forward just an inch more and in a folly of clumsiness tripped on her own foot, sending her sprawling over Naruto, her knee slamming into a very sensitive part of his anatomy. This caused him to emit a very severe sound and jerk forward, his lips locking very firmly on hers. This made Hinata fist her hands even more into his shirt, sping it again. Which all occurred at the precise moment a certain Uchiha decided to remind his best friend that just because he was the Hokage did not mean he could sleep in. Sasuke did not like doing favors for people, Uchihas just didn't do it, but when it came to Naruto he always ended up subjecting himself to all sorts of humiliating tasks. But what he was seeing right now, Oi Dobe, his hand not even having left the doorknob, was by far the most awkward situation he could have ever imagined. It was easy to conclude what was going on, and maybe he should have stopped himself when that shriek emitted from the other side of the door, but no. He was a man with a task and when it came to tasks and goals he never stopped. No, He was going to wake up that idiot, damn it, and tell him to haul his hungover ass to the tower to give him his next assignment and then toss Sakura a quickie before he left. He was a man destined to revive an entire clan, an action that entailed a lot of thorough consistency. Heirs didn't just appear like they used to. So he had opened the door with a bang to reveal a most curious of sights. Naruto tied to the bed with his shirt shredded, Hinata on top of him with her face a haze of red and tousled hair, her fingers tangled in the remains of his garment and her knee, and the groans. Uchihas didn't blush. It was somehow, in a freak mutation that accompanies complete bastardization, left out of the DNA encoding process early on. So Sasuke Uchiha was not blushing. Hell no. He was merely, intensely unsettled, causing adrenaline to open blood vessels in his body and flush his face a slight red. It didn't take long for Naruto to realize that the situation he was in was not normal. Sasuke! He yelled, breaking away from the stone-stilled Hinata. As soon as their lips had made contact, all bodily functions had ceased and she was pronounced legally S for at least the next 5 minutes, to stare wide-eyed at the familiar intruder. Sasuke quickly averted his own eyes. No. He had not been caught staring. My apologies. For once in his life, the Uchiha had managed to utter a clear statement unmarred by HNs, or just unintelligible due to the mumbling he was always doing. He turned briskly around, hand still firmly on the doorknob only now with knuckles very white, and was just about to leave and forget everything he'd just seen when Naruto's shrieks once again made him pause. Sasukeine. The Uchiha had whipped around again so fast that Naruto didn't even finish, only swallowed his cry and tried not to sweat his fear. Sasuke's eyes were a deep swirling crimson. Do not go there. The man grit out the sentence and Naruto flushed scarlet. Just WHO do you think I am, team? He sputtered, still unaware that Hinata still hadn't really taken a breath and that her face had gone from red to an alarming, yet somehow attractive color of purple. Sasuke cleared his tea and tried to turn around. I'll just go. Sasuke, just give me like 1 second to explain. It's not what you think it is, seriously, I mean, well it's not like Hinata and I don't Naruto. Uchihas don't blush, but all that adrenaline when your friend is beginning to dive into his life does do things to a person. She tied me up and interrogated me like a criminal. And then she said she was only 17 and that she doesn't remember her birthday last week the one before the one before. Now this was odd. Over the past few years, Sasuke Uchiha had gotten to know the Hyuga princess in ways he'd never even dreamt. For one, he actually talked to the woman on a daily basis because she seemed to be the only sane part of his relationships with Naruto. She was level-headed, sweet-tempered and all-around pleasant person. The exact opposite of the hog-tied, still knuckle-headed ninja splayed on his own bed. She was one that Sasuke tolerated only because he had to. Uchihas don't really make female friends. They marry. But when you're married to Sakura Haruno of all people, it's hard to imagine that the female gender is actually human and not some giant ball of raging energy and hormones half the time and then the seductive, kitten type the next. Sasuke figured his relationships with Hinata were pure research, just in case Sakura decided to come down to planet Sasuke anytime soon. And if there was anything Naruto wasn't, it was a liar. Sure he was stupid, idiotic maybe and annoying as bloody hell, especially now that he was surpassing everyone in a way that even made Sasuke proud, he was always honest. Hinata never forgot anything. She remembered the most minuscule of items, tiny details that had completely eluded Sasuke even though they'd been right in front of him. Hell, he hadn't even told her he liked tomatoes, and the fact was sworn to be a secret whenever Sakura found out it was way outside the lines of, just my favorite food, but there they were, sitting in the refrigerator of their sprawling house, just waiting. So the fact that 4 years, that one with Hiyashi was so hellish it doesn't even count, had simply disappeared, causing the usually super tranquil woman to go completely crazy and tie up the person she'd loved for practically her whole life and known inside and out and better than anyone and understood in ways Sasuke couldn't even fathom, was really weird. So weird that Sasuke actually decided to voice it. Are you serious? And when Naruto nodded he looked directly at the beautiful woman who looked back at him with the eyes of a rabbit about to seriously get mauled by a bear. Hinata, do you really think you're only 17? Naruto rolled his eyes. Do you think I could have made that up? He shouted, only to be completely ignored. Hinata didn't respond, but instead uttered a sound along the lines of EEP, followed by a yelp as she disintegrated on top of Naruto, completely unconscious. Sasuke didn't sigh, but he really felt like it. Couldn't he just have one normal day? Do something. Sasuke looked at the situation with tired eyes. He was only 22 himself, but good God, this was getting old. Sigh. In a few easy strides, Sasuke had gone to the bedside and gingerly scooped up the scantily clad woman, hauling her weight towards the bathroom before disappearing around the corner. Hinata drifted in and out, the waves pulsed around her and she curled in a tiny ball, floating. She didn't think about anything. Her mind was completely blank. Internally, Hinata knew herself very well. Nothing could get her here. That's why she never got sick very often. She knew that if it was within her she would be able to beat it. But now it seemed she was quite sick. It wasn't every day that one sees a Konoha missing Nin in the bedroom of their best friend. A best friend who had only gone on that one silly little scroll mission to get away for a few days, to forget, occupy his time for a moment or two. And for what? To try to save a silly little girl. She tried to remember his smile, the way he lit up when they passed the scroll off to the elderly man, the way he had shaken out his hair when it had rained on him that late evening. Even in death he had been beautiful, she supposed. Always beautiful, even when he was stained with red and pale streaks of light. But now, she tried to focus on the images of before. Flickers of Naruto were so evident within the actor's face. The whiskers, the way he'd briefly smiled at her. It was like every fantasy she'd ever dreamed had suddenly and literally come true, and frightened her beyond reason. She blushed and put 2 fingers gently to her mouth, tracing. He'd stolen her first kiss. A tug of her lips. He tasted like warm weather and hot days and rain that steamed on rooftops in the summer. The fingers gradually fell away, a new sight emerging, breathing life and color. A ripple cascaded through the stillness of her lake. Glassy eyes traced light on a murky horizon, growing, forming. She was entranced. Her hair wafted round her head in smooth purple strands, bubbles still leaking. Mama. Hinata stared before her, into the depths. Mama, look. He was short and chubby, his tiny hands reached up at her, a smile she couldn't help but recognize plastered to a face she'd seen a million times. Her father's face. Messy black hair every which way and that beautiful smile. His smile. Mama. She reached her hand out, oh if she could only touch him, this angel. For a split second her hand descended through the water and into warm air, and just as she had treaded the pads over his smooth cheek he faded. But something was stirring deep in her, and she didn't know what. It was so strange, even though she'd never seen the child before in her life she knew him. She knew him, and she loved him. Her heart had practically driven from her chest when she touched him, as though the very action was so right and perfect. She trembled. She didn't know, she didn't understand, but in other ways she did know. Like something kind of made sense now. Hinata didn't know if she was crying or not, for she was no longer in the water, but in a heavy fall of icy cold rain. She was still shaking, processing the image. Her eyes had stared back at her in that pretty face. Her eyes. Hinata sputtered and coughed as the heavy spray of water from the shower blasted down on her. She shrieked at the cold and reached blindly for the source, hands finding cold metal and twisting sharply. She panted, her shoulders heaving and blinked away the drops collecting on her eyelashes. Eyes were on her. She didn't seem to be familiar with the bathtub, and though she'd secretly been hoping after all these scary visions and unexplainable events she might actually wake up where she was supposed to be, but fate seemed to deal her another card. She slowly turned her head over her shoulder, to be met by what she'd expected to see. Naruto and Sasuke. The former of the two looking hopelessly concerned, now wearing a new shirt, the other looking truly Sasuke-like, completely bored. She swallowed heavily and stood up, pushing past the 2D spring water on the tiles, walking to the wall-length mirror. Behind her she heard some kind of, whispered, interaction. I told you we should have used warm water. She looks freezing. It worked, didn't it? Then the conversation dulled and Hinata ignored them, too fascinated with her image in the mirror. She was not taller, but her hair was so long she barely could believe it. She lifted the strands up and blinked, then moved her gaze to the rest of her. Her face was pretty, beautiful even in a pale, shy way. Her eyes were still the same milky violet, her skin still flawlessly white and soft, if not a bit thinner. And thank God her chest had finally gotten balanced with the rest of her. She closed her eyes and opened them again. The same. She took a deep, deep breath and looked at the two still bickering in the reflection. It was really Naruto and Sasuke, in the F. There was no other explanation. Hinata was forced to swallow this pill, and though it made absolutely no sense, she somehow managed to accept it. She was now 5 years ahead. How she got there was another story she couldn't even begin to answer, but for now she was waking up with Naruto and Sasuke was back to being himself. And Hinata really was 22 years old. 5 years had passed and she didn't even know where to begin. Hinata had never been so scared in her entire life. That was when Hinata finally noticed one tiny, little detail that had escaped her totally before. A silver ring with a solitary diamond glittered on her finger. The finger. No, no, it can't be, she mumbled, staring at the evil, beautiful little piece of ring. The two stopped and stared at her. Hina-chan, you okay? She turned around and faced him, dangling the ring in front of her like it was poison. We're married. Hinata gaped at the ring and then back to Naruto, who was smiling unsurely, and Sasuke, whose bored expression had peaked to one of slight interest. Just how much sake did I drink last night, Naruto? She managed to stutter out before collapsing back against the countertop, her hand raking through her hair. Naruto smiled again, a little more. Well, enough to make you, well, you know, crazy. She rubbed the bridge of her nose and med. He stopped smiling and his face turned to concern. Hinata, are you okay? Do you want me to call Sakura or something? Her head shot up. Sakura. Yeah, she'd completely forgotten. There wasn't just Naruto and Sasuke. There was a whole village. A whole village. That had 5 years of something she didn't. Suddenly the whole Naruto thing didn't seem that big anymore. What was big was the Hyuga clan and who was running it, and where everyone was, and was everyone alive and Hinata was out of the bathroom in a flash and ran to the window she'd seen before, throwing open the curtains and peering out. The first thing she saw was, oh my, what is it? Do you remember? She shook her head. Naruto, you're the Hokage. She didn't get an answer, only a sad whimper. Hinata, I thought you'd at least remember that. Hinata backed away from the window, displaying such alien images of a beautiful lawn and that towering monument with Naruto's stone face. 5 years. 5 whole years. Hinata was stuck in the future with no way out. Married to Naruto, who was the Hokage. And God only knew what else. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.